Good morning and welcome to the AutoTalk Weekly Wrap. I'm Richard Edwards, and with me today is Graham McDonald and David Crawford.
Morning.
Mr. Amos Bambury is off training the future of our automotive finance brokering industry, so good on him. Yes, it's been a couple of weeks, but we've made it to episode 99. I still have no finalized plans for episode 100. We'll work it out.
We keep talking about that. We haven't come up with any particular plan. I feel like 99 has been the number.
We've all been so busy. I was on holiday. You were on holiday.
David, I'm just busy being retired.
Yes. I've been busy on a project that hopefully will come to fruition soon. Graham, you've just been off with AIMVIA. How's the head?
Yep. Actually in very good health, thank you very much, because I always have the good sense these days to leave our dinners at about 9:30, 10 o'clock at night before the real stuff starts happening. Excellent Italian restaurant I could recommend in Mascot in Sydney, but I won't, of course. But I think the dinners are probably the highlight, aren't they? And a little point on that one, I always think the idea of what I call breaking bread afterwards. We might have a tough board meeting. We've got a lot of different points of view and opinions, people, very strong personalities from globally, from around the world now, attending these meetings. And the idea that afterwards you can go to a restaurant, eat, drink, be merry, talk, and actually get over the stress of the day and actually get back down to basics as people again, I think is a very good one. And I highly recommend it, not because the food's good, because it always is, but just it gets you back down to, I suppose, a centered point of being people that are all in it for the common goal. And I like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, speaking of eating, drinking, and being merry, we need to talk about AutoTalk Live. Now, we announced AutoTalk Live Christchurch officially 2 weeks ago. I think on paper at the moment we have one table left. We filled the room very quickly. We're in negotiations to get some more space and some more tables. We do have plenty of theatre seats left, which are great. You get front row and centre. You get to kind of get as close as possible to the speakers. But yeah, that is coming up on October 22nd. So if you haven't got your tickets yet for that, then please do jump online at autotalk.co.nz/live. Now, we've put out an initial release of speakers. We have Stephen Timperley, industry consultant, presenting Deloitte's industry benchmarks. Very well liked at the Auckland event. Michael Clark.
He was excellent.
Michael Clark from Impel AI, Mark Greenfield from Motor Central, Amos Bambury from Better Finance. Oh, who's that guy? I haven't seen him around lately. Angela Jorgensen from CFS, and Dave Boot from the Carbon Trading Company. We will add a few little more dots in there at some point, but it's not as big a day as Auckland. It's a little shorter, a little sharper. We are starting at midday. We're finishing up by 5:30, with, of course, the drinky session at the end. Plenty of food throughout the day as well. You get lunch to start, you get nibbles to finish. But from what I'm hearing, a lot of dealers are going with their suppliers, and a lot of suppliers are booking seats at the steakhouse next door, which I've heard is very, very good. So it's going to be quite the day. Now, one thing we have set up, and we've had confirmation on this, is we are having the heads of the various industry organizations coming to the event for a panel. So we're basically going to have them on stage during the during a half-hour session during the middle of the day. I've lost my screen. Hang on. Where is everyone? Let me find you.
We're still here.
Yes. So basically, we're going to have up on stage Greg Epps from VIA, Amy Wiley from the Motor Industry Association, and Lee Marshall from the Motor Trade Association to discuss, the kind of last year of regulation and the next kind of year or two going forward. So for anyone who does keep a close eye on that kind of stuff, this is really important. It's very rare to get these three together, or the heads of the three organizations together on one panel and get access to them. We will be taking questions from the crowd on that. I think that's going to be pretty cool. We are going to have a live stream, so the tickets are available for the live stream too. So for those of you who missed Auckland or even up in Auckland and want to see things like that panel, then please do jump online, autotalk.co.nz/live, and get your tickets for that. if you go on there and the tables have sold out, please do email deborah@automediagroup.co.nz. We are doing our best to try and just squeeze a few more in there because we did not expect this to sell so quickly. We were 170 in the room in Auckland, Auckland with a catchment of essentially 2 million people within an hour and a half's drive. We thought Christchurch, we'd be happy with a third of those. We're over a half already. So that's pretty good numbers and, pretty good signs for the event going forward. We will announce soon the next AutoTalk Live Auckland in May. And, you... I'm not sure if you talked about whether you're going to pop down for that, Graham.
We've yet to discuss that, Richard, but I'm sure we can over a coffee at some point in time. But I will say this, because I was obviously a co-presenter at the Auckland event, and I've been involved in the previous one as well. As a dealer that came along to the event, and for the people from my team that came along as well, I can say what an excellent day out these events are. And it's very rare these days to have a cross-industry gathering where you can go out, have a good lunch and a drink, but more to the point, hear a really good cross-section of speakers that'll make you think and challenge your thinking about your business. 'Cause let's be honest right now, it is pretty challenging. And we all want a few extra things in our toolbox about what to do or what could be coming over the horizon, just making us think a bit differently. And I think that's the beauty of these events. It just forces you to think a bit outside of your usual comfort box that you've got and the people you normally hear from, and think, hang on a minute, there's an idea I hadn't thought of, or somebody's perception I hadn't figured in. We all need more information at the moment about what to drive our business, or what will drive our business forward. And this is one of the few forums you can actually do that in. So I think it's really good value for money. And that's not a plug for it per se, Richard, because I can. It's just from an outside observer's point of view, I think it's really a good opportunity.
Yeah. Just going to say, I mean, look, it does cost, and we know that's hard at the moment. But as I said, a lot of your key suppliers out there, and we've got some amazing sponsors are working to subsidize the cost of this event and also take people along. But look, it's I think it seated by the time you're on a table, it works out to about 140, 150. A theatre seat's about 180 plus GST. Well, if you want to get Stephen Timperley in the door at your dealership for a few hours for advice, it's going to cost you a wee bit more than that. So there's good value there and good contacts to be made. So that's at the Ridges too. So nice little, nice hotel and really good restaurant there. Right, let's move on to some actual news, other than me attempting to sell tickets out there to people. Now, we had this one popped up yesterday, and so far this is exclusive to AutoTalk. You read on AutoTalk first. There are compliance issues for high-ace minibuses, and this is quite a significant one because this is a pretty key model to certain parts of the New Zealand fleet. And certainly there are a number of importers out there with vans sitting on their yards that they cannot comply, or they technically probably really shouldn't be selling at the moment. And then there are probably a lot of them coming on the ships down at the moment. So importers and traders have been cautioned about the purchase and compliance of the popular Toyota Hiace minibus, as authorities can't change their approach to certification. Some of these vans were originally sold in Japan as 14-seater vehicles. If they complied as such in New Zealand, they would exceed the weight limit to be classified as an MD1 vehicle, which is preferred by the market due to easier licensing requirements compared to the heavier MD2. As a result, 2 seats are typically removed prior to compliance. Well, let's be clear, the MD2 vehicle itself classification isn't really that much heavier. The weight difference is 2 seats. The problem being is you've got to measure it with 80 kilograms in each seat to get the final calculation. So VIA and dealers have now informed AutoTalk that the NZ Transport Agency is no longer allowing the re-rating of these vehicles following their modifications before compliance. Instead, the vehicles need to be complied as MD2 before being re-complied as MD1, a potentially complicated and expensive process. Now, interestingly, a technical bulletin on the NZTA website from December 2023, so less than a year ago, allows for such vehicle changes to be made under an exemption, though dealers indicate that these exemptions are no longer being issued. I've linked to the bulletin there. So essentially what would happen previously is a trader or an importer would buy a 14-seat Hiace commuter up in Japan. They would bring it to New Zealand. The D-Reg papers would say it's a 14-seater vehicle. They would have the seats removed. They would apply to, and I don't know the exact details here, but someone called Eugene at the NZTA in Wellington, they'd send him an email. He would send down a exemption for that vehicle. It could then go to compliance and be complied as a 12-seater
Mm-hmm.
MD1 vehicle. VIA Chief Executive Greg Epps says VIA is aware of the issue and is seeking clarification from the agency. They're trying to decide what their best approach will be. The wording of the VIM should allow for the vehicles to be complied, noting it states that inspectors need to inspect their vehicle as manufactured or modified, and that the removal of the seats is considered a modification. Whereas what seems to be happening now is they've removed the modification element. Now, David, I'll let you go on this in a second. So, yes, he thinks also once this is resolved, there needs to be a broader discussion around these classifications and how they're handled. He notes that there are multiple weight considerations that can be taken into account for various items, noting out that pretty much every stage of school has a different weight to work on. Or if you're doing a mixed vehicle, then it's a different weight again. So if you're talking just any vehicle, it's 80. If it's a mixed cargo vehicle, it's 68 kilos or something along those lines. It's all a bit confusing by the sounds of it. Until then, they're advising importers and dealers with these vans to not present them for compliance and to be aware of the issue when they're sourcing from Japan. Because you can, I believe, buy them with lower range seats in Japan as well. The NZTA, there are reports the NZTA has actually gone into yards and removed the warrant of fitnesses from such vehicles. Now, David, where are we wrong? Tell us what's wrong here.
There's several things. I mean, a lot of this is to do with something called vehicle dimension and mass. So when you said the weight's not very different because you just take two seats out, it's the difference between the tare weight and the gross vehicle mass. And the gross vehicle mass is calculated by 80 kgs in each seat. That takes it over 3.5 tons.
Yes, that's right.
So therefore, that's the difference between 1 and 2. The modification process is complex because it's not simply just taking it out and saying, I'm deeming it a modification. Modification is usually via a compliance process. And that's where people are getting caught because when you, for the new vehicle sector and the heavy vehicle sector, they are used to this type of regime where if you modify a vehicle, you then have to certify that modification so that it is recognised by the authority. As I understand it, this is not a new issue. It's been bubbling away for a number of years, and certainly during my time in the industry. I commented on it several times to NZTA, the issue being people take the seats out, they waff it, certify it as an MD1, put it back on the road, and then they put the two seats back on it, and they're operating a heavy vehicle as a light vehicle. And I think somewhere along the line, the NZTA said, we might be having enough of this, but I don't quite understand what the recent motivation for the NZTA to remove the certification process, but it is a really messy process.
Yes. So in regards to the modification aspect, this was somewhat of according to the NZTA's own technical documents, this was already an accepted kind of process as long as the seats that remained were factory fitted seats and seatbelts. I get what you're saying in regards to the compliance process, but they kind of historically and in writing accepted this as part of the process. And Greg Epps made a comment in regards to the second part of this in regards to putting seats back in, is that their point is that compliance people should really only be considering the vehicle as it's presented to them. And the vehicle as presented is actually, again, the writing within the VIM. It's very difficult for a compliance process or person to have to account for potential illegal future uses or modifications of a vehicle, because again that could cover a whole pile of different things. And I know from previously running a taxi company that you can comply a taxi as a certain number of seater even though there's elements of seat remaining by unbolting the seatbelts and removing them. For example, we complied a minivan, and to do that we took out one of the folding seats and unbolted the seatbelt and then had it complied. Well, does the compliance officer then have to take into account the fact that we could just go and bolt that seat back in? Do they want those bolt holes welded over? What's the,
Well, this is no different to a lot of modifications to vehicles of any sort. So the difference is, what are you entry compliant as? So that's your entry compliance certification, checking that it's consistent with the homologated rules and standards. Then once it enters the fleet, your WAF or your COF then is the measure for continuing compliance. And so therefore, if you change the vehicle, put the two seats back in, it should be picked up at WAF time. It's no difference for, I'll give you another example, which has been bubbling away with really unsatisfactory resolution is LED lights on motorcycles. You got to have a switch on, so when you go and take it in for a warrant of fitness, you switch them off because technically they're not meant to be on the bike as a homologated standard. So it's a really complex one, and I think the NZTA probably hasn't helped itself with the way in which it's had this informal, almost colloquial exemption process. But I agree it needs to be sorted out, and the challenge is that you're starting off with a van that's a 14-seater. In New Zealand, those vans, when they come in and then modified for a people mover, they stop at 12. They never sell an MD1 with 14 seats or the capability to 14 seats. So then if you're going to put more seats in, you have to go through that formal modification and recertification process. So there's a degree of inconsistency between new and used, but I just think the NZTA has not been very clever in the way in which it's communicating this, that they should.
By the sounds of it, they haven't actually communicated it. They've literally just stopped.
Yeah.
I mean, that's bizarre. Yeah. That is bizarre.
Well, it's worse.
It's
worse than that, actually, David. As I say, it's worse than that is what concerns me. And what we don't know, I suppose, is if the anecdotal, but I understand they're ripping the warrant of fitnesses off some of these vehicles sitting on dealers' yards at the moment. Well, so there's two issues. That first of all, they're actually negating their own compliance process undertaken in good faith by their own inspectors under the instruction of their own inspectorate. But what we also don't know, I suppose, is were those vehicles that they seized the warrant of fitnesses from and effectively nullified their compliance status, had they been retrofitted back as 14-seaters, or were they still in the 12-seat capacity as complied? Well, we don't know the answer to that.
Now, weirdly, my hope is that they were, because that would make logical sense. And hey,
yes, that's right.
I wouldn't be surprised if a few cheeky operators out there hadn't done such a thing. Because I invest. There's 40 odd of these listed on Trade Me at the moment, and I went and did some sniffing around some of the listings, and there were one or two which suggested that these vehicles could be complied as both. Now, none of them actually said
complied as both.
Complied, which is technically true.
Complied.
Yes, but does that mean that person, that trader has then, they haven't necessarily laid out the differentiation. Now, that could be completely innocent, or it could be a case of they have gone and complied as a 12, and they're going to do a sneaky. But
the other thing that's going through the back of my mind on this, Richard, and I was curious when I first read your article last night, I wonder whether the NZTA has received some legal advice on this. There's this little conundrum that people rely on the VERM. The problem is sometimes things sneak into that manual that exceed the law in terms of the primary legislation or the land transport rules or the regulations. And somebody may have pointed out that the compliance process that they've been operating under in good faith might not technically be legal. I don't know. I just got a suspicion. But again, I agree with Graham. If you're going to suddenly stop something, then they should be putting a communication out as to the reasons why and what they're going to be doing about it. This just seems to be almost as if they've discovered something that's wrong and they're too embarrassed, so they've behind the scenes decided to try and save face. It's a very curious way of going about it.
Well, there's a bigger issue to play, and that is the big L word, which is liability. And we're dealing with a remarkably similar case in Australia right now. And I don't set the street back to Australian issues here in New Zealand, but it involves an issue of standards and a regulator that has suddenly withdrawn acceptance of a standard for a particular vehicle or type of vehicle. And the whole issue about liability. So if you've got these vehicles sitting in New Zealand right now that are awaiting compliance, or worse, the compliance process or compliance acceptance has been withdrawn, and you have done so at that point up in good faith with the if you like, the authority of the regulator, with the particularly the exemption process is understood, whose liability is it currently for that vehicle to sit there unable to be complied in its current state on the basis that no information was given to you prior? But worse, if they are going to withdraw the status of those vehicles that have been complied and they're pulling warrant fitness labels off vehicles that are sitting there as 12-seaters, who is liable for that aspect of the process and recompliance as a 14, and the additional costs involved, or the whole undoing of the process. And none of this sounds like it's been particularly well thought through.
No. And those vehicles, if they do have to pull them off the road, they'll be pulled out of the hands of kindergartens and charities and sports clubs and schools. And now there's two arguments there. One, those are parties that are vulnerable and really do need to make sure that their safety is protected. At the same time, they're people that could be heavily affected by these vehicles being pulled off the road. So yeah.
There is another issue here, and I recall around about 2015 starting to promote the idea that the split point between light and heavy vehicles is now too low and hasn't kept up with commercial reality. So I promoted the idea that we should be looking at raising that from 3.5 to 4.5 tons, bearing in mind that Class 1 licenses can go up to 6 tons. So that would resolve a whole lot of issues for both new and used. And this 12 versus 14-seater vans, which is a very common standard overseas, would just go away overnight. The NZTA reaction at the time was interesting. Yeah, we could do that, but man, that would be a big job. We'd have so many rules that we'd have to amend and everything. And I just said, you do an omnibus rule. You just put a couple of officials on it for 8 months to go through and check all of the rules and cross-section it. Yeah, it's tedious, but it's not impossible. In fact, it should be quite straightforward.
Well, prime example is the new van market. I mean, Toyota New Zealand now can only sell a 10-seater highest jumbo because otherwise
that's
it's
right.
over GVM. Similarly with the larger Ford Transits and Mercedes Sprinters, either they need to go heavy, or there has been a move where rather than taking the established tested overseas fitments, they will go for a very high quality New Zealand seat fitment, often where it can be done lighter to get them more seats within the weight range. So yeah.
It was Toyota that first raised the issue with me, and then when I checked with some of the other manufacturers, they said, yeah, it's all becoming an issue. I don't see what the problem would be to raise that weight. It would just resolve so many different issues. We're just now at a point where materially, what is the difference between carting 14 people in a van versus 12 for a van that's actually set up and applied and homologated overseas to safely transport 14 people? What is the difference in the New Zealand context? Well, I would say diddly squat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. Exactly. And the other aspect of that is, this is again part of Greg's discussion. This needs to be looked at. I need to make it clear we have gone to the NZTA for comment. They are yet to come back to us, but they will no doubt have an answer that we'll talk about next week. The other side of that too, and as we were seeing this call previously, is this needs to be discussed in terms of electrification as well, because these weight limits are becoming a problem from a perspective of an electrified vehicle. Yeah. I know there are a large number of electric shuttle buses, minibuses, and I believe a lot of those basically have to switch over to being heavy just simply because the weight requirements are there. And I almost feel like some of the stuff is going to put people off shifting to more modern, safer minibuses and bus transport, because this is a problem. That level is problematic from a commercial point of view. Those two extra seats could be a difference between whether they can justify going to a more safer, more modern vehicle or not.
The tier weight difference between an EV versus ICE vehicle, no matter what the class, is quite significant. So this is an issue that's not going to go away. It needs to be resolved.
Yep. Right. Moving on to the next one. Auckland Vehicles, or the remains of Auckland Vehicles, has entered receivership. Auckland Vehicles, the company previously responsible for distributing a number of major brands in Central Auckland, has entered receivership. Auckland Vehicles Director Grant Vincent placed the company in the hands of receivers earlier this month following the acquisition of its franchises by the Winger Group on July 1. Previously handled Hyundai, Isuzu, Renault, KGM and LEV from its Greenlane hub, with Hyundai and Isuzu Ute operations in Henderson. Winger only purchased the assets, not the businesses, but to take on 53 staff members. It is unaffected by Auckland Vehicles' position. In fact, that's where we originally came up with the story. Was someone had suggested there was issues at Wingers, and we We need to make that very clear. There are no issues apparent at Wingers. It is with the remains of Auckland vehicles. Receiver Tom Rodwald says they're still working out the realisable value of what's left in the business. All premises were leased. It's going to take a couple months for a full appointment. Now, I believe there may end up being more to this story. I had another liquidator sniffing around after we published the story. I gather there are some issues around the fact that the receiver was appointed is quite right by the director, and others are keeping an eye on this to work out, obviously, the order of who is getting paid. So that's an interesting one there. It was
I thought that the media took a bit of a rum line on that one, Richard. I was watching it from afar. It's unfolded in Australia while I was there. And I hate to use the words mainstream media, but the non-automotive aligned media took the line that it was the collapse of the automotive industry at play here. It was an indication that the businesses had collapsed, that nobody was selling any cars anymore. Where the Beltway stuff, if you like, is that this was a logical, if there may be some issues with it, but a logical pathway with the winding up of the business and the transfer of the assets to another. As far as we know, there's been very little cessation in the trading activity of the individual dealerships involved.
Look, it is and it isn't, because this one's been a very long run story. We've discussed it before in AutoTalk. This dealership was for sale for a long time, and there was a buyer in place, as my understanding, for a long time, and basically, as the market declined, funding was not available or able to be sourced. Whether the two are tied together, I don't strictly know. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, that sale taking a long time, the downturn in the market, that's all going to cause issues. Yes, this is part of an orderly wind up of what was a long-running and respected business. I mean, ultimately, this was split out of Wingers in 2016, so essentially been around that long. Grant is a very liked and well-respected operator, but yeah, it's an interesting one, and I think there might be more to come around this. Not necessarily anything that Grant's done, but just people kind of staking their claim. I suspect it'll be interesting to see where this goes. Now another interesting liquidation or receivership liquidation that's come through just yesterday, and a company you've probably dealt with in the past when you were doing your dodgy old fleet pickups of cars from the ports, Graham. Major stevedoring company to end Auckland operations. Tauranga-based stevedoring company C3 Limited is set to close its Auckland operations, resulting in more than 100 job losses. A Maritime Union of New Zealand MUNZ spokesperson said City Management told workers about the move at a meeting on Wednesday. Around 115 employers, including casual staff, have reportedly been made redundant, with around 70 of them being union members. C3 is part of the Lynx Cargo Care Group, headquartered in Sydney, and handles vehicle and general cargo on the port. Operates across 23 locations in New Zealand. C3 closure on Auckland's wharf would leave Wallace Investments as the major third-party stevedoring company at the Port of Auckland. So C3, they're the ones that generally, well, for a lot of ships, are driving those cars off the boat, aren't they, Graham?
Yeah, I believe so. Funnily enough, actually, as soon as you came the name up, I wasn't aware of the story, but I remember the glory days of walking down to Wallace Investments, and who are still trading, I see. So no, it wasn't the ones that we used to use. But yeah, you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, fundamentally, people have to do stuff on the wharf. There's a manual aspect to all the wharf and port operations that occurs. And it was down to those two companies. We were having this conversation just a couple of days in Australia about some of the ports there and the manualisation of their processes. And one of the major ports, I won't say who, has had the bright idea that should go back to effectively a tally office on the wharf, where men in high-vis and grumpy pro-union shirts that are on break for more hours than they're actually at work grudgingly shove over packets of keys to you. And I thought, well, here we go, back to 1995 all over again. Have they not learned anything? So I don't know what C3's operations were like in terms of the mechanisation of it. But one left.
Yes, and one left in service is generally not a good thing. I guess we hope.
No, it is. No, it's not.
Wallace Investments keeps costs in check, and I'm sure that our wonderful logistics operators in the market will be doing their best to make sure that there's no changes there. But you never know. You never know. Competition's always good. Yeah. Now, on to some sad news. Nigel Harris, the former managing director of Ford New Zealand, has died. He was at his Bay of Plenty home surrounded by family. His funeral is today at 11, so in about 25 minutes. There is a live stream for those who can't attend. We have details on there. So Harris worked for the Ford Motor Company for 34 years, commencing at Ford New Zealand in 1985 as a fleet sales analyst. Following his graduation from Massey University with a Bachelor of Commerce, in 1994 he was appointed Managing Director of Ford Hellers, establishing an international sales company in Greece. In 1970 he moved to Ford UK in Dunton, Essex to oversee development of small Ford vehicles, and he returned in 1999 as the head of sales and marketing and became Managing Director of Ford New Zealand in January 2000. In 2002, Harris was appointed the head of marketing, sales and service for the Ford and Mazda brands in South Africa. And from 2007 to 2012, he was sales general manager for the Chang'an Ford joint venture and vice president of marketing, sales and service at Ford China. He continued to move around a firm, particularly in China and India, where he led Ford for some time before retiring in 2019. Coming back here and in an advisory role for New Zealand Trade and Enterprise, and retiring as a gentleman farmer, as he called himself. I knew Nigel. He was the head of Ford New Zealand when I was appointed Ford New Zealand when I first started out as a young pimply trade journalist many years ago. He was a lovely guy, a really lovely guy, a real Ford man through and through. He was with the brand pretty much his entire career, as you can see. 63 years, taken too young. Look after your health, guys. We've said this before. Really nice guy and a sad loss to the industry. I'm not sure if either of you ever bumped into him in your career paths.
No, not personally, although I did know of him in his history at Ford. He was referred to several times.
Mm-hmm. So, sad loss there for the Ford team. Now, Toyota New Zealand, they had lifted their full year profit to 88.1 million. This, of course, is to the end of March, so I suspect the numbers for this year might be a wee bit different, though Toyota's doing okay. Toyota New Zealand has reported an after-tax profit of 88.1 million for the financial year ending March 2024, marking a 4.8% increase from the previous year's 84.1 million. According to the annual report published on the company's office website on August 14, Toyota New Zealand's total revenue was $1.8 billion, up 12% compared to the $1.6 billion the year prior. In a director's statement, the company says the results were amid ongoing regulatory changes affecting the new vehicle market. No kidding. The timing of new vehicle wholesales was severely affected during the year due to the changes in the clean car discount, CCD, in January 2023, and then again when the CCD was repealed in December 2023. To New Zealand's various business sectors continued to perform strongly, with the new vehicle division securing a 36th consecutive year of market leadership at 22.6%, and the business as a whole securing record sales. This was despite overall new vehicle market being down 11%. It's preparing for the Clean Car Standard, which aims to reduce CO2 emissions levels by encouraging the employment. You think they'd be well prepared by now, you'd hope. So a pretty good report there for Toyota New Zealand.
Well, no shit, Sherlock. Look at the sales numbers. I mean, we don't need to be high-end analysts to understand why. Look at the top 10 or even the top 20 selling motor vehicles month on month in New Zealand. And David, I'm sure this is what you're about to say too. Look and see what sells. What are the top brands consistently amongst those numbers? What do they sell? And so there's not really a particular surprise there.
I think I was going to take a slightly different tack. Toyota has positioned themselves well by their move to hybrid as opposed to PEVs and BEVs, because it's an affordable form of electrification, and people still like it for the cost affordability, and there are significant doubters about range still, even though they probably shouldn't be with the number of chargers around. Richard, that question or that statement you said, you'd think that they are well positioned with the standard going forward. In my view,
you'd think they would be well prepared by now. It seems like a weird time to say that they are preparing. Yeah.
Well, they are preparing because they have a challenge, because all of the eggs in the basket at the moment is with hybrids. opposed to the mild hybrid with the Ute. And going stronger has been a challenge for them. So that they're not as well positioned because they're going for a multi-fuel or a multi-energy type option internationally. So I think as we get to 27, 28, 2029, it's going to be a little bit of a challenge for them. And
their commercial product is also not the best in the market. In fact, far from the best in the market. I mean, their hybrid Hilux, the CO2 on that is significantly higher than even the standard four-cylinder Ford Ranger. And then when you've got things coming into the market like the BYD Shark, I'm hearing rumors of 46 grams it's going to be rated at. It's going to be an interesting time.
And it's a curious move right at the moment that they've said, well, we're not going to sell diesel motors now. It's all going to be mild hybrids, and they're talking about this form of electrification. And I get slightly annoyed that people are referring to mild hybrids as electrification of the drivetrain. It's a cute phrase in my books because
of the air conditioning system.
yeah, and stop start and that sort of thing. But yeah, and you're quite right. The CO2 difference is stuff all, and it's not a reduction. But good on them to now. $1 billion turnover company, and they maintained that in a really tough operating environment. That's an outcome to be applauded. They do have some challenges going forward, and I'm not quite sure how well they prepared themselves. So there'll be some really hard decisions to be made by the firm in the next couple of years.
Yes, along with the decision of confirming a new permanent chief executive. They have their acting one at the moment, but hopefully we'll hear soon what the long-term position is going to be. So, we'll see there with that.
Is this a bit of a curveball position on that one for you guys for a second? I know you want to carry on, Richard, but do you think there's a hint of, I'm going to use the words arrogance, that what Japan does and what is good for Japan, and let's face it, Japan has effectively shunned electrification when it comes to EVs. It's shunned it. I mean, there's no other way of putting it. That there's been very little EV market penetration, and the market leaders in Japan, by a significant percentage, are Toyota, who have made it very clear to now about their hybrid pathway and their plug-in hybrid pathway. So the mantra of Toyota New Zealand is not just around what is available, but it's almost the same sort of thinking as if this is what the population actually wants, as opposed to what the regulation says they should have, and therefore we're going to deliver what the population wants, and to hell with the regulation. I know that's a simplistic way of looking at it, but I sometimes wonder if there's a bit of that Japanese-esque mentality that's floating on through to Toyota New Zealand.
I think, Graham, yes and no would be my experience. I know Neeraj and Alistair Davis before him pushed hard against that, and they were pushing harder than what their parent company actually wanted. It's all about availability. Yeah, I know it is. I mean, there's this creative tension between the fully Japanese-owned New Zealand head office and the Japanese plant back in Japan. There have been some really significant and robust discussions behind the scenes. I know that. So but we're a 2-bit player in the world market.
Yeah, we are. Now on to some more local profit results, and I've lost my screen again. There we are. Colonial Motor Company has posted a trading profit after tax of $17.88 million for its preliminary financial year results to June 30, down 41% on the year prior. The company reported revenue of $1 billion for the period, up 1.6% year-on-year. Chair Ashwar says the company has reported deteriorating market conditions over the past 2 years, and this resulted in an increasingly challenging trading environment, and the deterioration is evident in this year's result. This year's result was indicative of a year of two halves. The first half produced a respectable result in a weakening market, albeit with high inventory carrying costs. The second half bore the full brunt of the recession, with softer light vehicle demand continuing, high interest rates, and an oversupplied market across the industry. Now, but yeah, this is to the end of June as opposed to the end of March, as Toyota's were. So yeah, this will be carrying the weight of that just big drop in the market over the last 6-7 months.
To be fair to Colonial, they did signal that. I believe we talked about this 6 months ago, even 12. And as an advisory to shareholders at that stage, they did warn that the profit expectations for this particular period would be significantly down. So I have to say, accurately predicted, and for a company as possibly conservative as Colonial, well predicted.
Yeah. So as they point out, the market's down 26.2% to the end of June. The heavy trucks business continues to perform as well as customers replace their existing vehicles with long-awaited new units. They have launched the JAC Motors brand in New Zealand, which they believe will bear fruit in future years. That's starting with light trucks and electric trucks, and they've developed some new parts warehousing for that, and they're building a new South Pack facility in Palmerston North. They believe that the looking ahead, War reflects on the outlook for the new financial year, noting the state of the New Zealand economy will dominate the direction of retail markets. Demand for light vehicles is likely to remain subdued for as long as interest rates remain relatively high. Oversupply will continue to be a challenge for the industry, and the industry has to manage hand in hand with a growing number of new brand entrants competing for a declining market. They believe Ranger and Everest continue to maintain their momentum, providing a degree of support to Ford dealerships, although they too are not immune to market conditions. They welcomed the government's move to follow Australia essentially on the carbon emissions levels. So yes, not a bad result there. Well, not a wonderful result on paper, but it does come off the back of a few very strong results. So sometimes those numbers don't necessarily tell all the story when you're looking at them straight on. Too Cheap. They expect steady profits despite tough trading. Too Cheap Cars Group is advising shareholders that the company's business performance for the 4 months ending July 31 has been negatively affected by the prolonged economic downturn. The NZX listed automotive firm says it expects the recessionary environment to continue for the rest of the financial year, but remains committed to delivering a result close to its stable year-on-year profit guidance. In May, the company reported a record of $6.2 million net profit after tax for the full year to March 31, an increase of $4.9 million over financial year 2023. The company notes that inflation, exchange rate volatility have had some impact on pricing, while the cost of living crisis has resulted in falling finance and insurance penetration rates. They've had to shutter their East Tamaki site due to a landslide risk, but they're working on a temporary, that the closure is temporary, because I know that kind of East Tamaki botany area is pretty popular these days with various car sales operators. So yeah, they are suggesting some tough times in their part of the market. How are you going out there, Graham? Is it that bad?
Well, everyone talks about good, bad, and different in the market. I want to say it's like pockets. We're hearing that North Auckland is so the shore, basically, the sort of the Wairau precinct isn't doing as badly as others, perhaps. There are pockets of South Auckland that appear to be doing okay. I think West Auckland, from what I can hear, is definitely down. Rest of the country, I can't say. No, it's not great. It hasn't been great for quite some time. It'd be a liar if I said it had been. But you almost work on a day-to-day basis in this industry, particularly used. I'm not sure about new so much. I can't speak for the new industry, but in used, you work on a day-by-day basis in terms of your client base. And so what you do today may not be what you do tomorrow and the next day. But we work with middle-class New Zealand. I'd say lower-level white-collar, upper-level blue-collar New Zealand. And they're the ones that have been hammered the most by the current recessionary environment. The ones that have got mortgages, and probably got mortgages they took on only sort of 2, 3, 4 years ago, or up their mortgage or refinanced. And they're the ones that are currently being clobbered. And so therefore our target market, if you like, out in this particular part of the country are the ones that feel those effects the most. Anecdotally, I hear that if you're in the marketplace with cheaper vehicles, people that just need transport to get to work because they cannot get to work any other way, pockets of South Auckland, for example, they're still chugging away because no matter what, people need cars. And they're not paying a mortgage, they're renting, and their rents have been reasonably stable. They're working in blue collar positions that are just still grunting away at the warehouse. It's still getting paid, and so that machine keeps chugging away, and there are finance options for them. So it's very piecemeal.
Mm-hmm. Right, moving on to the next one. Again, another profit results. The season for it. Heartland Bank says annual profit down 22.2%, but motor vehicle finance up. Heartland Group has announced a full year net profit after tax of $74.5 million, down 22% on the previous year, while motor vehicle finance was up 3.8%. The bank increased gross finance receivables for the year to June, up 6.4% to $77.2 billion. While some volatility is expected to continue through the remainder of the 2024 year, the longer-term outlook for Heartland is positive, it says. Pretty somewhat expected there. You know, motor vehicle finance, since the mortgages became a bit of a problem, was, you know, somewhat expected to go up, so that seems to be paying through there. The company points out the motor vehicle finance was up 3.8% in the market, where total new and used car sales by dealers were down 12.7%. Yeah, interesting result there from them. Now, government proposes rucks for light fleet by 2027. Now, in fairness, they aren't saying 2027 it will happen. They're saying as early as 2027. So tolling reforms and road user charges ruck for all vehicles by 2027 as part of a new revenue action plan outlined by the government to target critical transport infrastructure. Transport Minister Simeon Brown says the plan will leverage private sector innovation and expertise and create a roadmap to help deliver projects sooner. Delivering infrastructure to increase productivity with economic growth is a key priority for the government. So what they're going to do, they're going to make better use of existing funding tools for the National Land Transport Fund, reform tolling legislation to support bringing forward infrastructure investment, unlock new funding tools including value capture, and transition all light vehicles to road user charges by as early as 2027. The National Land Transport Fund is under increasing pressure and is not sustainable. Taxpayers have had to top up the fund and take on more debt to pay for the infrastructure they need. It is clear that New Zealand's current funding model isn't fit for purpose. Reforming our approach to funding and financing infrastructure projects provides certainty for New Zealanders and the transport sector. Alongside our RONs and major public transport projects, these reforms establish a clear infrastructure pipeline. Now, they are going to toll a few roads, so things like they're talking about the Takatimu North Link, the Manawatu Gorge, and the Otaki to north of Levin Road of national significance. So bit going on there.
Yeah. Now, where do I start on this? There's smoke and mirrors in Simeon's announcement here, which I find kind of frustrating because our funding for roading is from two sources when you ignore the consolidated fund. Fuel excise duty, which has very minimum leakage and non-compliance for petrol, and road user charges for diesel. So I don't understand all of this commentary about a lack of funding, etc. But what by going road user charging, which I have advocated for a long time and am a keen supporter of, it resolves a number of problems. So it resolves those differential competing charges between fuel excise duty and RUC for plug-in hybrids. That goes out the window. There are a whole lot of other advantages where you can then have different, if you go for electronic RUC, so you've got to go to RUC first and then you can go to electronic RUC. Then you can set your tolling because your car is tracked. People don't like Big Brother, but you just track it with gadgets on the toll roads. And you can do congestion charging, different times of charging per day. So there's a whole lot of advantages here. And it does streamline the funding into one funding stream as opposed to two funding streams. The issue is going to be the transition and leakage, so non-compliance. So we have a degree of non-compliance with RUC for diesel already, which is higher than fuel excise duty. And I think the leakage will be strong to start off with, higher than what people want, but over time will come down as people get used to it. I think there is quite a number of people in the light vehicle fleet have driven both petrol and diesel, so they're used to the RUC regime. So it's going to be interesting, but this has been a long time coming, and they should have been starting to implement it from 2025, not 2027. But successive governments and the Labor government didn't want to know about it. So I have to give Simeon some bouquet for deciding to bite the bullet and do it. But I just was frustrated by this messaging around funding. It's nonsense because
it sounds to me like long and short of it is any new roads or any major stuff that's going to open soon, essentially public-private partnership paid for out of tolls or road pricing. And I'm fine with that. I've always said if someone wants to build me a 4-lane, beautifully surfaced 120k an hour highway between Auckland and Wellington, I'll pay a giant toll to run it every time because it's just worth it to people, and it's good. It's good business. It's good for safety. It's good for the speed of goods getting around. It's good for the climate because better roads means less time on roads, means less fuel burnt to get between point A and point B. It makes so much sense. People won't like it though, because
the
government's
go to Melbourne,
be going down the road to get milk.
Go to Melbourne and go to Sydney. PPPs is how they do it. It's just it's just the way it is.
And you end up with some amazing results. Have you been down that Western Tunnel, Graham?
Yeah, the West Connects is absolutely amazing. The West Connects is incredible. I did 21 kilometres underground. Just
on
absolutely amazing.
4-lane wide parts tunnel.
At one point, I think it was 7 lanes wide. We had a connector at the airport. It was 7. But I was going to say, just a little point. First of all, so Richard, I think you owe me a chocolate fish for your absolute predictions and assurances we had road user charges by 2025, and it was definitely going to happen, and particularly in the EV sector, that it would only be fair, it would be unfair for the next 6 to 12 months until RUC was definitely going to come into the petrol vehicles as well. But the second thing that you both had missed, what's happening in 2026, gentlemen?
An election.
Exactly. So whether there's been, and I'm being a bit cynical here, whether there's been a degree of realization that it's a bit too late to start talking about implementing things in 25, 26 that will have what is initially seen as an adverse effect on people's pockets just as we're coming out of recession and just as if people feel as if the economic miracle has been conducted by the current government, and then when another tax comes on, better to push it into the grey area of 27, where they, assuming this government gets a second term, 27 is the next year of nasty stuff. Do the bad stuff in 27.
I also think that the risk of this is being taken off the table a little bit because we had, you hear so little about the Labour Party these days. What's the head of the Labour Party currently? He was the Prime Minister briefly. What? I'm not being silly. I can't remember his name.
Chippy. Yeah. Well, they don't know either.
So interestingly, he came out last week saying that they are willing to come to a long-term agreement, cross-party agreement on this kind of infrastructure stuff. And so potentially, you could see National worried about going up the next election with these kind of things, and everyone going, "Oh, you're going to toll all the roads, you're going to track our cars, blah blah blah." But it sounds like I would suspect we'll see Labor coming in behind this plan in the very near future, and we'll see some kind of agreement on long-term strategy around this stuff. So I think Chippy almost opened the door to this being announced last week by saying that.
Three things. Firstly, Simeon has removed the doubt about whether this is going to happen or not. They've just said it's going to happen. Mm-hmm. Secondly, I think there is going to be reasonably strong cross-party support for it in principle. I know Julianne Genter kind of likes the idea of RUC and differential charging because it incentivizes people to actually look at other transport options. Third thing, Graham, the reason why they're not doing it now is the mapping the transition. I can tell you this from my previous experience as a policy wonk. Getting the I's dotted and the T's crossed on this is going to be extraordinarily difficult. And it's not going to be an easy thing. So even if they wanted to implement it by next year, they couldn't. It would be undercooked. And I think Simeon's realised you cannot undercook this. This is a change of enormous magnitude, and it's got to be done with some care and with some careful steps put in place. And the agencies have got to be set up to be able to do it. So it's going to take time, to be fair. So you put the timing of the election, the cross-party support that's got to be done, and a number of other things, and it is a really difficult one, because I know from previous experience that until a minister comes out and says this is going to happen, only the work up until that stage will have been, yes, it's something that we should be doing because officials have said we should be doing it, but they haven't done any work on how to do it other than high-level conceptual thinking. Getting the practicalities in place for this is going to be extraordinarily challenging, and I hope they take the time to do it right.
Yeah.
And it snookers the opposition's ability to play the me. All they can do now is play the Me Too game, isn't it? That's it.
Yeah.
Look, as far as I'm concerned, anything that brings more Rons is good, because I think we're still sitting at no fatalities on a Rons, aren't we?
Correct.
So anything that brings more of those is a good thing as a regular driver.
Love me a good Ron. And and this is the thing. We travel enough. Richard, you and I travel enough on New Zealand's roads. David, I can't speak for you because I don't have any travel patterns, but God damn, we love a good Ron when it comes to just getting around the country. And if you travel overseas in any other country other than I've spent a week in Niue, so I'm going to say I'll exclude that one from the list for a second. But our roads are just woeful. Our regional, interregional, intercity roading status is just awful. And it is no wonder we have the road toll that we have, let alone the increase in emissions from vehicles, start, stop, up, down, slow, fast, the condition of the roading. And we ask ourselves why we have all these factors when it comes to road tolls, our fatality figures. There you are.
I think I might just come back and correct the fatality on roads of national significance. The motorway crash this week, I know technically it's not a RON, but it is an equivalent standard of a RON in terms of segregation, multi-lane. That will be, it'll be accidents like that where something goes wrong and a heavy vehicle crosses the centre line that causes a problem.
We're still very lucky, but certainly the chances of that's a catastrophic freak accident, and the chances are severely reduced by the way RONs are done.
Yeah, no, RONs, the safety patterns of RONs is significant over the rest of the roading network, no doubt about it.
Right, we are approaching an hour, so let's just run through these last three stories. The Motor Trade Association celebrates Tyre-Wise go live on September 1. The Motor Trade Association says September 1 marks a significant step in the automotive industry's recycling and environmental journey. From September 1, under the Tyre-Wise scheme, end-of-life tyres will be collected free from retailers and collection sites with no disposal fees. MTA Chief Executive Lee Marshall says the MTA has been involved in the decade-long project and it is part of the Tyre-Wise group. Tyres dumped or buried in landfills have been a blight on the country. Can I be really cynical for a second, David? And you can have you'll give me an answer in this in about 10 to 15 seconds. Tyre-Wise, excellent. Why it took a decade, and I feel like an awful lot of people got paid in the process, still stumps me a little bit.
Well, the history of this is that Nick Smith got cold feet and said no, and then successive governments didn't look at it until we had the Greens in with Labour, and then they started to look at it under Eugenie Sage, and then it lost the plot, and they went back and they had to redo the work, and they came up with a system and fees that were different to what was originally promoted. So I was a little bit, I have a bit of a jaundiced view, but it took another 6 years to get it going again. It was something that should never have been put off by Nick Smith. To this day, no one understands why he got cold feet.
Yeah, well, good that it's there now and underway, and the same group is working on battery.
Batteries are next, aren't they? Yes.
Yeah. FSF marks membership milestone. The Financial Federation has welcomed social lender Money Sweetpot to its membership, marking 100 members for the first time in its 59-year history, donating 100 food parcels through the Salvation Army and Woolworths NZ Food Bank project will mark the milestone unconventionally. Now, this is a bit of a light, fluffy story, but keep an eye on the FSF, people. It does very good work on your behalf. If you write finance on cars, that group has saved your ass multiple times. They were the big pusher in getting the triple CFA dialed back. So support that organisation and support those finance companies that are part of that organisation. And lastly, speaking of support, the Giltrap Group renews its commitment to Kart Sport NZ. The Giltrap Group has renewed its commitment to Kart Sport New Zealand by providing the organisation with 2 vehicles for its ongoing operation, a Polestar 2 EV and a Volkswagen Amarok. Motorsport was one of Sir Colin Giltrap's greatest passion, a passion that has been passed down through the generations, says Hamish Miller, head of Giltrap Group Motorsport. Karting is where it all began for so many drivers, and we're delighted to continue our long-term association with Kart Sport and explore ways to grow our partnership. If you want to see the repercussions of the Giltrap's motorsport support, and it's sad that Sir Colin won't be around to see it, I would say in the next month we'll see a full-time contract in F1 for Liam Lawson. So that's where that little bit of dealer funding, that little bit, that dealer support and push through the years that so many dealers are involved in New Zealand starts to pay off.
We punch above our weight worldwide on this. I mean, you just look at Scott Dixon's track record, and he started out in go-karting and had support from the Giltrap Group. I mean, it's driver after driver after driver. They all came through that process.
Yep, and if you look at things like the Twitter Racing Series, which again the Giltrap Group are involved in too, go look at the number of current F1 drivers on the grid, or F2 drivers that have got super license points or started early in their career within the Twitter Racing Series. So the new Williams driver that's starting this week, the Argentinian chap, he's just got enough points for a super license. Out of those 45 of them came from doing the Twitter Racing Series. So even that plays a part in international motorsport.
Yep.
So look.
Well, good on Giltraps.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you everyone for watching. This podcast still astounds me that we get so much feedback on it, and it's had so much impact. We'll be back very soon for episode 100. Thank you guys for joining me again. You're off on the motorbike this weekend, David, or is it a bit wet?
It's horrible this weekend. It's been horrible. I did go for a ride on Wednesday, but it was the only clear day.
Yes, and Graham, you're I guess catching up on actually being home for once.
Yeah, I'm sick of gallivanting around the world, right? And that sounds better than it actually does. I actually have to get knuckle down and do some serious work. So
just sell some cars.
Go me.
Yes.
Yeah,
I'm
exactly.
going to hang out with my daughter, and don't tell the EV people, but I'm driving a Silverado 2500 HD.
Yeah, good on you, mate.
Yeah, I can see why Niwa bought them.
You and I need to go have burgers and fries in it.
Anyway, we'll catch everyone next week, maybe, for the AutoTalk weekly wrap.
Signing off.